Yeah, that'll probably work. Hi guys, I'm Matt. I started a new sort of religion church thing with a friend of mine. It's like a humanistic church, and the idea is we found like just tons of parallels between with a humanistic point of view and then like metaphors and models and so on, and ways to like help people get through the challenges that they have, right? Like most places aren't going to take responsibility for like giving you meaning in life. You go to work and you're like, hey, why am I here? And they're like, I don't know, man. Like that's not our problem. So really it's only like religion that takes responsibility for having that conversation and hosting it and saying, we're gonna try to make you successful at this. Everybody else just wipes their hands up, like not my problem. This is about making meaning, and it's the idea of like, how do you actually utilize this as a tool as opposed to just being like this vague idea that you're sort of subject to. Like sometimes you have meaning, sometimes you don't. Okay, so the important thing about meaning is that it seems like really hard to define. It's hard to talk about it without referencing the concept itself. It gets very circular very fast, and there are associated ideas, but they never seem like they're really the core of it. So there's other things that are similar to this where it's really hard to define them because they're very circular. It's kind of like, well, you just have to, like the definition of porn, you know it when you know it. And it's really hard to reference it without referencing itself, by referencing other things. So other things that work this way are direct experiences that you sense, and that you can't really describe it to somebody without just saying, hey, you have to just try it. So example would be ice cream. I can talk about ice cream for a week and you can get a rough idea maybe of what it might be like, but it's totally different if you actually taste it. You have to directly experience that. And that direct experience is something you create in your own head. So I can't put it into your head ever. Like you have to create it yourself in order to know what it is. And you do that through a sense of some kind. You can directly get that information and then create a model of it in your head. So we also have the sense of, we have the 5 major senses, we also have sight. Everyone knows about that. But we also have like a parallel sense to sight, which is not image-based, but it does detect blue light. So there's a totally different stream of information just for blue light. It's not image-based, it's just the presence or absence of the amount of blue light, and it's directly connected to the systems that regulate your circadian rhythm. So you'll have a sense that time is off, or a sense that you don't quite know what part of the loop you're in. Like if you're in a plane and all the light shifts really fast, or if you're indoors all the time and you don't have like the changes in blue light. And then you reset it by going out and kind of like getting exposed to that. So you have this vague sense, and it's direct, and you can't share it with anybody. You have to just experience it and then try to reference it if they have that same experience. But it's an independent sense. So blind people still can detect blue light, even if they can't form visual images, because it's an independent information channel. Along the same lines, so now we have those as senses. Senses operate in certain ways that make them familiar, like that makes sense, it's a sense. So if you take the word door and you write it as fast as you can for a minute straight, 68% of you will start to be like, this doesn't look like a real word anymore. It's like door, 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 and already it's like, I feel like it's a real word, but it doesn't feel like a real word. And that's the flip side of deja vu. So Jamma's view is the feeling that you know you're supposed to recognize something, but it feels totally unfamiliar for some reason, and it's just really disconcerting. You're like, I know I've seen this before, should be familiar, but it doesn't look real. Like I don't think I believe it at the moment. And so a way to think about that is if your ability to recognize meaning in something is a sense, like it's a direct sense where you create the experience, it can get burned out just like any other sense. If you just like eat ice cream constantly nonstop, you can't taste it after a while. You burn out that sense. And the same kind of thing happens in senses where they need context and contrast in order to operate. So if you're just in a white room with white lights, you can't see any edges, you don't know how big the room is, you don't have any contrast in there. So your sense of sight, so it's not blown out, but there's nothing in there to register information. So it's the same thing with meaning. Like human eyes have a lot of contrast in them. So with very little information, we can infer a bunch of meaning because we have a lot of edges to work with, a lot of contrast. And we evolved in that direction. So like our closest ancestors or like relatives today have low contrast in their eyes. Like it's hard to infer any meaning from there. There's not a lot for that sense, your sense of meaning to operate on. So basically what I'm going with this is that meaning is a sense, or at least it's worth thinking of it that way. And that idea means that literally you're making meaning, because meaning is something that arises when you create that experience of seeing something and going like, I see meaning in that. Just like you can smell something or you can taste something. But some of you are probably thinking like, wait a minute, I don't know. Probably not, maybe not. You're doubting that, right? And then you might go on to like, does any of this even mean anything? Who cares, right? The universe is going to end anyways. So basically what happens is that, like any other sense, it can go numb, or it can get burnt out, or something like that. And so your ability to navigate in a world that is mostly doubt gets burned out. And like meaning is how you navigate the world when everything is doubtful. You can doubt everything, all of it. You know, you could be a brain in a jar, it could be the Matrix, you could be living in a simulation. There's all sorts of options for doubting that, right? And that's can be disconcerting, right? It's like, well, I can't, it's like you can't see what's behind you, right? Like I can't see my hand right now. We can't find meaning in most of what's in the world. You know, we'll look at it, even if we can see it, if we can sense it, we don't sense any meaning in it most of the time. And it's actually unique to see like a trail where you're like, hey, I see meaning in that. But if you like grew up in the woods your entire life, there'd be a lot of meaning in there. You'd see all of the contracts with all the trees and the leaves and the rabbits and stuff, and you'd be able to see how the meaningful interactions are. Because you see you can resolve the contrast there and attach information to it. You can see it. Your sense is attuned to that. Just like some people can like taste wine and tell like where it was grown because they've attuned to the differences there. So if your sense of meaning gets burned out or low contrast and you're disoriented now, that can be very psychologically painful. It's like, I don't know what I'm doing now. I don't know where to go. I don't know what I'm going to do next. I don't know why I would do anything next. Why don't I just lay down and die? Like, who would even really care? That's like disoriented, right? It's disoriented in a world that is mostly doubtful, and you're sort of looking for like a North Star or a light that's not doubtful. Like, what can I reattach to? Why am I doing things? So the stack is what we're working on as a humanistic way to basically reorient around meaning and not be lost in the world anymore. So I'll run through it real quick. So it starts with cogito ergo sum, which is more accurately stated, not I think, therefore I am, but I doubt, therefore I am. That's the key part of the thinking, is that you can doubt everything. You know, you could be a brain in a jar and not know it, but if you're doubting things and throwing things away as this could be doubted, eventually you get down to the root that you're like, well, I can't doubt that I am doubting because I couldn't doubt without existing. So something must be real. Like something has to exist to be doing this doubting in the first place. And that's like rock solid because the doubting proves that it's not doubtful. So you can start there. So it's sort of, doubt is the most common thing in the world, but this sense of certainty is based on that doubt. The fact that you do have doubt about something gives you something rock solid, totally undoubtable, right? So you start there. You can't doubt that you exist or something is existing. So I doubt, therefore I am. You can start with that. If you get lost or confused or disoriented or don't know why you're doing something, you can start there. You're like, well, I'm doubting something. Okay, so I can hold on to the fact that I exist, because otherwise I couldn't be doubting anything. And you can also extend that to something must be happening, not just existence itself, but there's like sequences, activities are going on, because I remember doubting, and then I remember like, oh yeah, so I must exist. So that's like a sequence of actions. So something exists and something is happening. I can hold on to those. Those are solid. And the next step is we very quickly realize that this is important to us. We have established a judgment on whether or not this is the right thing to happen. This is like, oh, that's nice. I exist. I can be certain about that. The judgment is like creating a right or wrong, good or bad kind of thing. Things aren't just in existence. Things aren't just happening. There are good things and bad things, things that I prefer, things that are more relevant. Like that, we're creating that. So, because we created these judgments, now we have these lists of importance, lists of values. Some things are more important than others, some things are more relevant than others, and that is like something we hold in us, and that's how we act in the world. We act based on these values. Like, I like this, I don't like that, and that'll affect my actions. So, this is where it really gets key, because like we'll have values, we can connect with other things that have values. We can recognize the difference between something that's acting on its values and something that isn't. So like this projector, I'm not going to expect to have a relationship with this projector because I just look at it and I'm like, I don't see any sign that it knows what's going on or that it has any opinion on what's going on or that it understands right or wrong. The same thing with like rocks and bushes and dogs even. Like dogs obviously know what's going on, but like not quite, you know, there's a limit to how much they get what's going on and how much they even care what's going on. So same with like babies. Like babies have all this potential. You're pretty sure if I give it 15 years, it'll be sentient. But right at the moment, it's just a bunch of potential, right? And it doesn't really interact with me as if it knows what's going on or has any sense of right or wrong. But you see these hints of it. You're like, I see these little hints, you know, like fairness. Like babies understand fairness. Babies understand beauty, more or less. Like there's these hints of things, and then it develops, and you encourage that because you see that hint. You can connect with that being that is creating values, and you can see that it's creating values because it's responding to it. Like it's possible the galaxy is sentient. Like those brains have emerged spontaneously in any pattern, maybe. I don't know. But if you can't talk to it, or you can't see its effects on anything, you can't connect to it. Like there might be ghosts, you know, phasing in and out of us, but if we never interact with each other, if we can't see any evidence of it, you can't connect to that thing. So you create values in you that changes how you behave in a predictable way. You can see that in other people, mostly people. You know, that's the humanist part. Basically, this is our standard for human. Who is a part of human and humanist? It's if they do this. We may not technically be able to recognize it sometimes, but if we can recognize it, at least we can connect with them and form a web. So because we can connect, like that we have create values, we can connect values to other people, it creates hope for the future and for other times and spaces and other dimensions. Because if I have something that's meaningful to me, and I tell someone else about it, and they recognize that I told them about it, it's now more meaningful. It's now become a part of their worldview too. Whether it's positive or negative, whether they agree with me or not, whether they like it or not, they know that it's important to me. And I know that they know that it's important to me. And that gives me a hint of how they respond to it, what's important to them. And now I know what's important to them. And that forms like a web in time and space and conceptuals and so on. That makes everything more meaningful. Now I'm part of somebody else's story, they're part of my story. That means there's a better chance of my story going on and lasting longer and covering more time and space. Like everybody knows who Genghis Khan was, right? That dude added a lot of meaning to the world because like his story kept getting passed on and everybody remembers him and we use him as like a meme. And the more like we'll go to Mars and we'll still carry the story of Genghis Khan with us to Mars. And that like will connect what he did all the way into the future and across time and space. So what he did was more meaningful because of its impact on the rest of the web and the story, and the meaning is carried forward. And the hope is that that doesn't get cut off, right? Like if it gets cut off, that's when you lose hope. That's when you're like, sci-fi idea that, well, nobody can have any kids anymore, like, so we'll never have another generation. Everybody loses hope right there. They're like, the story will end because no one can carry it forward. So as long as you believe that this person can carry the story for you, you have that hope that the meaning will keep going and stay connected. And because you create meaning and then you have that hope that it'll keep going, whatever you're doing right now can be more meaningful, infinitely meaningful, if it's part of, if you have that connection in your head to like the infinite future and infinite time and space and infinite people, still being one steady chain of meaning being passed along, where like your values will get passed on by the next group. They'll maintain your values. And that means that whatever you do now is connected to like infinite meaning in the future, with the hope that the chain won't break. So basically that like reorients you to whatever you're doing now. You can like use that stack to say like, what am I doing now? Can I see how it connects as far in the future and to as many people as possible? Or maybe that doesn't matter to me, but what does matter to me? Like my values, are they gonna get passed on? Are other people gonna be reflected? Is it gonna be reflected in those people? And then it should clarify really quickly whether that's true or not. You should get a very clear sense of, can you see the meaning in that situation? You know, because it's a sense, right? You gotta exercise that sense, you gotta clear out anything that might be burning out that sense, like excess meaning. Like if something really big is happening in your life, that's maybe all you can think about. It's like this thing, like a wedding, for example. People get crazy around weddings because it's like this super bright meaning thing that like blurs out everything else and you're just like blinded by it. That's all you're responding to. But the same thing is it can help you reset the contrast in things. You can like shift over to something where it has the right amount of information for your sense of seeing meaning in something to activate. Because it's not too complex, where you're not following enough of it and it's like a big blur. It's not like too slow, where it's static and you don't actually see it doing anything. You don't see that back and forth of the connection to values. So that is what I have as the stack. We're still working on it. We would love any feedback or anything on it. The idea is that it's just a way to reorient and find meaning anytime, any place, for anybody. Basically for any reason, like no matter what you believe, no matter any other assumptions you make, you can rely on this one because it's based on things you can verify for yourself. And then you just like run through it real fast and reestablish your connection to what's meaningful and important. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt. So Sean Hood regrets that he can't make his next lightning talk, so I think we actually have 10 minutes. So if anyone wants to give a quick talk or stand-up routine or something, if not, we'll just do Q&A immediately. So any takers? Anthony? Okay, cool. Welcome.
Yeah. It's not going to be much of a talk. It's going to be not much of a talk, just a brief advertisement for what I want to do in the gaming session to try to make sure people actually show up. I want to invite people to try a randomized gaming experience that is kind of a popular-ish social sport in a certain community of people that have grown out of the speedrunning community. So that's going to be part of the gaming session tomorrow, and it draws on some themes that I'm interested in of like how randomized gaming could inform randomized narrative if you start to bring some recent work on like simulating social dynamics in games into the picture. But I think it'll also be fun and let you get acquainted with like a very quirky subculture of gaming. And I'm gonna try to set up like a little 10-minute experience, but we can also maybe like watch some expert level matches with some commentary. So if you want to like wallow in that subculture and talk about the weird theoretical thoughts I'm having around it, then please come by. And tomorrow I'm going to circulate a sheet where you can sign up and indicate what you're interested in, so keep an eye out for that.
Cool. Thanks, Anthony. One quick sec. Since Anthony gave his plug for his gaming session, if anyone else that's running a gaming session wants to give a plug as well, feel free to jump in. It looks like Venkat's going to beat you to the punch.
Yeah, I am running a gaming thing tomorrow, but this is not about that. There's a different game running around. There's a copy of, why am I blanking on the book? Reality Hunger. That copy is going around. I've been tweeting screenshots. So if it comes to you, just browse it, pick up a passage that you like, put a little physical star on it, like, Twitter like. And if you like, tweet a screenshot. And at the end of tomorrow, make sure it comes back to me. Okay. All right. Oh, and lunch has been delivered, but after the Q&A session, give us 5 minutes to set it up, and then we'll start lunch.
Hi, my name is Randy Lubin. I have designed a game for tomorrow called Walking the Future, and we're going to actually walk around Santa Monica and project into the future a little bit. So we're going to do a walking tour in the year 2030, looking at different aspects of culture and infrastructure and everything in between to get a sense of where Santa Monica might evolve. So I hope you join me for that.
Hi, I'm Jordan Peacock. I'll also be running a game during the gaming session. It will not be situation normal, that's not quite playtest ready, but I will be doing a world building exercise using the RPG called Microscope. So it'll be a crash course. We're going to build a world and a history together in an hour.
Cool. And that's, let me just pull up the schedule. That's tomorrow afternoon. Right here, 1:15. Okay, does someone else wanted to come speak for a couple minutes? Question? Sure. You want to start Q&A? If we could get our speakers back up here, that'd be great.
Question for Matt.
Hey,
regarding your stack, struggling with hope. Hope seems to be more of a sentiment, and it seems to be hope and how it works in your system?
Okay, yeah. It's not, I'm not like married to that as the term, or it's more of like the best label I can find for the concept at the moment. The idea being that there seems to be a lot of overlap, even without this framework, leading into it, between the idea that sort of like you can put up with anything as long as you have a reason. Like anything. You can deal with absolutely anything as long as you have a reason that makes it meaningful. It doesn't matter how like horrible it is or how unusual it is or how much you want it to stop, you want to continue. As long as the reason makes it meaningful to you, doesn't matter what it is. It's worth doing. It's meaningful to you. And that's like a one person's thing. So one person can put up with anything as long as it's meaningful to them. Or they can achieve anything as long as it's meaningful to them. So it can take something right now. Have you heard of shaving the yak, that phrase? So shaving the yak is like from programming, the idea that you're like, I need to like work on the whiteboard, but the light bulb is out. So I'm gonna change the light bulb. And an hour later, you're shaving a yak and you're like, how did I get here? You're like so far off of the critical path of what you're trying to do, but you have to shave the yak because A, B, C, and D, and X, and Y, and Z, and eventually you'll get back to what you're doing. But if you can maintain that train of meaning, then shaving the yak makes sense and is appropriate and all that. So you have like hope that shaving the yak isn't a waste of your time, that it's not the wrong thing, it's not bad. That hope is from that chain of meaning, connecting it to something, other spaces and other times and other people. So,
I also have a question for Matt.
okay.
Yeah, I was sort of wondering what the role of ethics or values is in your stack. I noticed the one main
Okay,
example
yeah.
you gave is Genghis Khan, who we might not hold up as a shining example of how to be.
But you do.
It almost seems like
Yeah.
you're pro-impact, whether it's positive impact or negative impact.
Right, you have heard of him, right? That's the important thing. Yeah, so actually that's perfect because that's the first major branch off of this trunk that isn't covered by this trunk, right? Is roughly the way we conceptualize it is that morality is concepts of right and wrong, mental structures. So morality can be anything you want. Any structure at all can exist in your imagination. And then you have to compromise your ideas about right and wrong with reality, because the real world only has so many options. It's limited. So as long as you're alone, you only have to compromise with nature. You can do anything nature will allow. But if somebody else with an opinion about what should happen shows up, now you have to compromise with their opinions too, if you want to exist in the same space. So then ethics arises. It's like, how do we compromise our opinions about what we're going to do? And eventually you have so many people over so much time and space that you have to start writing down your agreements, and that's where law pops up. Is that along the lines you were asking? So,
I guess I would ask, are you planning to encourage people to think about ethics or just to think about having impact?
yeah, okay. So a huge part of this is so that you can guide the conversation around like what's important, what should I do, what should I not do? And a lot of the time, like I don't find the framework for those conversations helpful because it seems like it's not, the conceptual framework behind the conversation is lacking and it's redundant and it's got gaps in it and so on. So this is an attempt at a better one. Like what we end up with as an overarching goal for organizing ethics and morality and law and so on is what's in the best interests of humanity. Because if you care about anything, you must care about that thing being continued on and other people adopting it and so on. It's very difficult to rationalize how you could care about something but not care if anybody else acts on it or if it's enacted in the world or something like that. So you need the rest of humanity to make it remember that it's important and carry it on and forwards.
Also for Matt first then, your
This one is triggered, yeah.
your layers of stack, it struck me that from the bottom to the top, it was ever increasing what general semantics called time binding, which is extending outward in both directions from the now, right, into the past and future, and making it wider throughout. Starting with the simple, I doubt, therefore I am. Something hidden in that word I is a persistent I, not just in this immediate moment.
Yeah.
Because part of Descartes' original doubting was, what if I'm basically just like a flash consciousness?
Right.
And somehow he hand waves and decides that, okay, well, I'm not really a flash consciousness because my doubt seems at least to be consistent over some little time span. And then at each point on the stack, you do the same thing. And then we end up, and I loved how in somewhere around the penultimate stack level, you were talking explicitly in terms of expanding time and space. And I think that might be just straight up the theme all the way up the stack that might be useful.
Yeah.
And then at the very top is where it does start to get quite circular, when we start to be concerned about basically story, value, ethics, any of those words, right? What is meaning? What is this highest level of your stack? And it strikes me that it is, well, it's a complete story, right? But then what is that? And all of those things are, so it's like a complete process of some kind. It's a production function or something. There are various ways we can triangulate around trying to describe it. And that seems like a next job to take there. And then the final thing is that your derivations and your mind style and language with it actually remind me a lot of Ayn Rand's objectivism. And if that isn't something you've looked at a little bit, there's a lot of similarity there, right? It's there's even a debate among objectivists as to whether it is simply survival or flourishing that is sought to be maximized by humans.
Yeah.
And I caught major strands of both of those and your articulations of meaning and value and everything, and especially the part of your answer to another question there was, if you value something, you want it to continue. That, taking that as near axiomatic is sort of the core of, it's called the objectivist ethics. So, yeah, I'd love to hear any of your thoughts on that.
There's a lot in there.
Yes.
So I think working backwards, yeah, so the whole point of this as a framework is to try to like cut through some of the confusion about a bunch of other frameworks. And we figured that what seemed to us the most consistent way to interpret it was that not like survival, because who cares, right? Like the dinosaurs survived for a really long time, then not, right? So whatever, they might have had like a rich, diverse culture with all sorts of artistic learnings and like understandings about the universe and philosophy and so on, doesn't matter, because they're dead. Like nobody knows what they thought, right? So there definitely is relevance to survival, as in if you don't survive, you can't perpetuate meaning. Like if you don't keep going, you can't remember the past. Right? Your story gets cut off. If you go to another world and you find the remnants of a civilization, that's meaningful. It's like, hey, we can read some of their signs maybe and look at their museums if those survived. But the vast majority of whatever was meaningful to them is gone, because there's no one there to like tell you what it was. It's too high resolution to be passed on by like rocks.
Their story is over.
Yeah, well, they're mostly, I mean, now there's footnote in somebody else's story. It would have been a much more of a story if they could have continued it themselves, because it's a very rich diversity of meaning, but it's all mimetic, right? It's really hard to embody it, genes or something. And did that address that idea?
Yeah, that's great for associations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've actually got a couple things for David, too.
Yeah, go for it.
Yay. First of all, your nemesis doesn't know we're all here this weekend, right?
No, not at the moment.
Fantastic. Yeah, it wasn't clear to me what live streamed, really, how wide that broadcast will be.
It'll be a really interesting examination of filter bubbles to see how long it takes to enter his. Yeah.
Indeed. The second is that your question at the end for us to think about, basically how to convince a theorist like him, or at least less committed ones, how to possibly bring them into our worldview. And I absolutely love your use of math and statistics, and I think that has got to be a cornerstone of it. And I don't know what else. And I'm curious to hear other things that happened. Like if somebody is obstinate about understanding the pigeonhole principle, et cetera, I don't know where else we can go. But that seems like a great starting point.
Yeah, I think it's like worth drawing a distinction in kind of a scientific revolutions type of way between the people who are trying to learn and the people who are trying to educate. The people who are trying to educate about some worldviews, it's like that feels like a very, very unwinnable conversation, versus if somebody is like at the top of the funnel, so to speak, in terms of encountering a bunch of new ideas, that I believe is where the opportunity is in the meme war, if you will.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. And that's a good spot. The whole stack is in flux. It's sort of like an open source software project or something. We want to make sure it works. We think it works for everybody. We want feedback on it and see if it works or where does it not make sense. So some of the ticks are a little arbitrary. The thought on that is, and it's key for like the morality, ethics, law branch, is the way we conceptualize it, morality is arbitrary by definition, because it's a judgment. Like you have to say like this is right, this is wrong, but you can't make a judgment without a judge and without a standard to interpret. Judges don't exist without law to make judgments based on, and they don't exist unless they do the activity of judging. So the standard that you use to make a judgment has to be arbitrary, because right and wrong didn't exist before you had the judgment. Like right and wrong is a decision, like something is right or wrong. Like I think this is right, I think that's wrong, based on a standard. So the standard has to be picked before you have any judgments with which to choose what's right or wrong standard. Yeah. Yeah, I think a couple of important, yes, I think you're right. It's sort of like the coincidence thing. Like, there are enough combination of hands in poker that we'll never repeat one, ever. But somehow we repeat these really important patterns, right? And we like arbitrarily decided those patterns are important. We could pick any other pattern in the whole poker possibility, decide that's the important pattern, and now it's significant that it happened, right? But we chose arbitrary things that we thought to make them significant out of the whole space. So does that answer that one? But basically, like, it's a coincidence thing, right? Some things, coincidentally, we decide are important, even though there's an infinite space and we could have picked anything else in that space. So it's the same with, there's like a relevance to continuing to exist that is like, if you don't exist, you're irrelevant. Like you could exist, but you don't, so you're not relevant. So the space of things that can be determinants for action, that whole conceptual space, most of it's already set for us when we were born, because we're not tabula rasa, like we're not just popping up out of nothing. You know, we have millions of years of accumulated decision making. So we have like at least 3 different decision making systems in our body that are underneath us. And our consciousness, like our awareness, is actually the least important decision making system in the unit that is human, right? Like 90% of your decisions are made unconsciously by reflex. They're like chemical signals going back and forth. You're not even aware of them. They're all tactile. They don't, do any metadata at all. And then you'll have like the subconscious and so on, and that makes most of the rest of the remaining decisions. Then your conscious mind makes like 1% of your decisions, like really effortfully, and it's not even aware of most of the other decisions. So when you start thinking, what's right or wrong, what's my big picture kind of thing, it's after, all these other things have established relevance. Like you've got processes that make sure that you continue to eat, and you continue to sleep, and you continue to not die, and that gives your conscious mind the window to think about things and think about really high abstract ideas like what is right and wrong. Because like your sense of taste, the brain, the part responsible for taste, doesn't really care about right and wrong, but it does have priorities. It's like, this tastes good, that tastes bad, bitter is bad, stay away from it. So you don't get a choice about those as decisions until consciousness goes and and questions everything. Because consciousness is totally arbitrary, right?
So in a sense, it's like judgments and values sort of creating each other reciprocally. But you do start with some arbitrary judgments that you might not, or almost certainly will not understand. And so you're calling this initial judgment the arbitrary point in the sense that you just don't know why you're making it. You can only define from that point forward.
Well, I mean, like, it's arbitrary in the sense that one of the important part of this, right, the reason that we think it's useful for everybody is that every single person has to interact with everything through their own perspective. So even if, like, God talks to you, like, even if God, like, comes to you personally, not through an angel, and tells you what the truth is, you still have to accept it, right? It's still your perspective on it. Like, God can't replace your perspective with his perspective. Like, it's your perspective, you have to accept it, and it means that you have to do all this work on every single thing you deal with, whether you accept that you have to do it or not. So this is just like the structure of stuff you're doing anyways, in order to deal with things through your perspective.
A question for David.